According to the UN, today more than 50 million people around the world are fleeing conflict and persecution. Many seeking refuge in Western countries that subscribe to international laws on sanctuary. But increasingly, those governments are making it harder to get in. In Canada, long the target for Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka, arrivals are now being caught up in the rules designed to frustrate people smugglers and terrorists. Juliana Ruhfus went to find out why.
We'll just keep our options open.
August 2010. A ship called the MV Sun Sea reaches Canada, carrying nearly 500 Sri Lankan Tamils. It is a journey organized by people smugglers, carrying the Tamils on board of a cargo ship to claim refugee status. And it isn't the first ship with Tamil asylum seekers to arrive into Canadian waters. 10 months earlier, the MV Ocean Lady had brought 76 Tamil passengers. The arrival of the two ships prompted a tough response from the government. The so-called boat arrivals were arrested and put into prison before starting a screening process to determine who could claim refugee status in Canada.
While our government believes in offering protection to genuine refugees, it is imperative that we prevent supporters and members of a criminal or terrorist organization from abusing Canada's refugee system.
Critics condemned the government officials for their negative portrayal of the potential refugees. They said officials focused not on the plight of the Tamils, but on security concerns to limit the numbers of refugees entering Canada.
Canada accepts about 260 to 270,000 immigrants per year. Of those immigrants, about 13% of them, 28,000, have been and ordinarily are refugees. What the Canadian government wants to do is restrict the number of refugees and bring in more business class, high-end immigrants.
Canada's response to the Tamil refugees is not unique. All around the world, Western governments are faced with an increased inflow of migrants and a debate on how best to deal with it.
We have just released our statistics. There are over 51 million people in today's world that are fleeing conflict, violence, and persecution. It's the highest number since the end of the Second World War, and it's clearly one of our top international issues in today's world. We need urgent solutions to it, but there won't be any quick fixes.
கனடாக்கு எப்படி வந்து நீங்க அங்க நிக்க சான்சி
4 years after the two ships reached Canada, we have come to investigate how government policy has changed since their arrival. The Sun Sea is now docked in Vancouver. We have arranged to meet Patricia Kuna Robinson, one of its passengers. Since she reached Canada, she has given birth to a daughter called Bindavi. Is this the first time that you're seeing the ship?
Yes, after 4 years I see
the first time that you're back.
Yeah. I'm really sad because I couldn't touch this boat. The ship carried us and saved us, so I have to touch.
The journey of the Sun Sea had been organized by people smugglers who charged up to $40,000 for the passage on this barely seaworthy cargo ship.
It was so tough. I didn't go outside.
You were inside the boat all the time? Downstairs?
Downstairs.
Okay,
Trouble
so
for
they
our
didn't want
journey.
you to be seen.
Yes.
So this was a really dangerous trip.
Yes.
Before you started it, did you know how dangerous it is?
எனக்கு தெரியும் இது சரியான பயங்கரமான ஆபத்துண்டு ஆனால் நாங்கள் கட்டாயம் வேற நாட்டுக்கு போக வேணுமென்றதால தான் இப்படி ஒரு இது ஆபத்து இருக்குன்னு தெரிஞ்சும் வந்தோம் நாங்கள் இந்த கப்பலில்.
Most of the Tamils who arrived on the two ships had fled Sri Lanka at the end of its bloody civil war. The early months of 2009 saw a massive shelling campaign by Sri Lankan government forces in the northern Tamil areas of the country. They even targeted hospitals and safe zones where the civilian population had concentrated. On the other side of the front line, Tamil Tiger commanders, who had been fighting for an independent homeland, kept over 300,000 Tamil civilians trapped as a human shield. The final months of the war saw tens of thousands of Tamils killed, leaving survivors traumatized and desperate to leave Sri Lanka. After reaching Canada, Patricia was given refugee status and has made Vancouver her home. It is what many Tamils who are still left in Sri Lanka dream of. Since the two ships arrived, the Canadian government has set up a multi-agency task force to stop other ships with Tamil refugees. It is run by Ward Elcock.
There are clearly some people who still want to come, and there are clearly some venture organizers who see a business opportunity to make money.
Elcock's men have stopped at least 2 other ships with Tamil refugee claimants departing for Canada. So what should the migrants do if you are a Tamil in Sri Lanka and you've gone through the civil war and you may still suffer repression from the army? How are you meant to get out?
There are, I'm sure, lots of people leaving Sri Lanka, a variety of places. All we're saying is, as Canada, that look, they may want to leave Sri Lanka, but sticking them in a decrepit boat, 500 at a time, with little food, little water, and trying to get them over 52 days of an ocean voyage is inhuman.
Much has changed since Tamils started coming here in the 1980s when conflict broke out in Sri Lanka. Today, Toronto has become home to the largest Tamil diaspora in the world. Many Tamils who once arrived as refugees now own their own businesses, and quite a few of them are prepared to help and pay smugglers if that means bringing their relatives out of Sri Lanka and into safety. Gary Ananda Sangari is a Toronto-based lawyer and advisor to the Canadian Tamil Congress. It was from Gary's offices that he and his staff gave emergency advice to the passengers from the Ocean Lady and the Sun Sea. He says that since then, the government has used these boat arrivals to change the refugee application process, making it harder for claimants to get accepted.
I think the most disturbing aspect of this is the designation of individuals arriving in small numbers, 2 or more people, as irregular arrivals. So if the Minister of Immigration designates a group as an irregular arrival, and the minister, then a new set of processes kick in, and that includes a minimum 1-year detention, and detention for people including children.
To find out more, we have arranged to meet immigration consultant Sam Selaya. He has 2 clients whose cases were refused by the Immigration and Refugee Board because they are accused of being part of the human smuggling network. Are you Sam? Yeah. Sam says both men were recruited by agents and paid for their own passage, but they also ended up working on the ships. They now face deportation, and we agree to hide their faces in case they are returned to Sri Lanka. So what was the work that you were doing on board of the Ocean Lady?
மற்றவங்களுக்கு பிரேக்ஃபாஸ்ட்டில் இந்த வேலை செய்கிற 15 பேருக்கு நாங்கள் செய்வோம் வேலை. அப்புறம் 8:30 போல் மதியத்துக்கு 10-15 கோழி வெட்டுவோம், இந்த அது உருளைக்கிழங்கு அதில் மீட் ஐட்டம்.
Did you do anything else other than cut vegetables, cook and work in the kitchen?
இல்லை.
No, I did not.
If your client, in this case the cook, was accused of just that, of cooking and cutting vegetables, on what grounds can he be deported?
They are accused of being human smugglers. So that is the grounds that they are going to use to deport him.
The international definition of a human smuggler defines him as someone who profits from doing so. Canada's laws do not include this provision. Did you get any benefits from the smuggling network for the work that you were doing?
ஒன்லி அந்த கூட சாப்பிடலாம், அது ஒன்று தான் எக்ஸ்ட்ராவாக. என்னடா நாங்கள் வேலை செய்கிறபடியாக அவங்களுக்கு தெரியாது, பட் நாங்கள் சாப்பிட்றோம், அது ஒன்று தான்.
So Sam's just given me the documents for these two cases that we can see the government's arguments. The decision says it is apparent, based on a clear interpretation of the meaning of aid, that the claimant aided the smuggling operation by providing a vital and necessary service, food. Without the provision of food, the crew members could not have operated the ship effectively, and the smuggled passengers could not have arrived alive on Canadian soil. Government critics say this is not an isolated incident.
The Canadian government in the last 10 years has gone more and more in this direction, where the definition of who is not eligible, who is inadmissible, has been broadened and broadened. There have been all kinds of cases now, and upheld by the federal court, where they have been essentially the potato peelers.
The government's argument is that they are increasingly dealing with large-scale organized crime. They point out that the MV Eastbury changed its name to Ocean Lady in 2009, shortly before setting sail from India. It went on to pick up Tamils in Indonesia and southern Thailand before its final journey to Vancouver. Around a year later, smugglers renamed the Harin Panage the Sun Sea. But Canadian investigators caught on and tipped off the Thai police, who arrested the smugglers in Bangkok as they stocked up on supplies. Amongst them were a French Tamil, 2 Canadian Tamils, and Kuna Robinson Christaraja. The Tamils were fined but disappeared. A month later, the Sun Sea embarked on its voyage to Vancouver. Patricia Kuna Robinson has invited us into her home. Arrested on arrival in Canada, her husband, Kuna Robinson Christaraja, is now in prison, awaiting his trial for smuggling offences.
Finally, I found.
Okay.
This is my wedding album. Photos.
You're so young.
Yeah, I was 21 years old.
And that's Kuna Robinson.
He was 28 years old. Now he's very thin. Now he looks like 18 years old.
Investigators have accused Patricia's husband of being the owner of the Sun Sea. Kuna Robinson was accused of being the owner of the ship. That's why they've put him in prison. And there are some documents that prove it. So why do you say that in spite of these documents he's innocent?
அப்படித்தான் சொல்லியிருக்கு. ஆனால் எனக்கு தெரியாது அதை பற்றி. நான் இந்த கப்பலில் வாரத்துக்காக ஒரு குழு மெம்பரோ ஏதோ அதுக்காக சைன் பண்ண சொன்ன இடத்த நான் சைன் பண்ணினா நான் அது தாய் லாங்குவேஜில் இருந்தது. பிறகுதான் எனக்கு தெரியும் அது இந்த கப்பலுக்கு நீ ஓனரான்னு சொல்லியிருந்தேன். தனக்குள்ளே எல்லாம் வச்சு தண்டி கொண்டு இருப்பார். இப்போ தான் எனக்கு தெரியுது. இப்போ சரியாக கவலைப்படுறாரு. உள்ளே இருந்து சரியாக எங்களை மிஸ் பண்ணுறேன்னு சொல்லுவார். இப்போ யோசிக்கிறாரு, சரியாக யோசிக்கிறார். என்ன எல்லாத்துக்குமே நாங்கள் இங்கே எப்படியாவது ஒரு நல்ல நாட்டுக்கு போயிடணுமன்றதுக்காகத்தான் அப்படி.
But the criminal cases are only one aspect of the Canadian investigations. The authorities say they are worried about terrorism too. The Tamil Liberation War was sponsored in large parts by donations from the diaspora community, such as the one in Canada. Leading Tamil Tiger proponents were organizing the war effort from the safety of the West. In 2006, Canadian authorities listed the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or LTTE, as a terrorist organization, making membership an offense under Canadian law. Ward Elcock says it was important to follow up on information that Tamil Tiger commanders were being smuggled into Canada at the end of the war.
I mean, the Tamil Tigers did have small but a naval element, and they did operate a number of ships to smuggle weapons and other commodities around the world. And yeah, the Ocean Lady was an old Tamil Tiger vessel, and there are concerns that elements of the Tamil Tigers, who were defeated in the war in Sri Lanka, are seeking to rebuild. The trouble with threats is it's often hard to exactly define what the level of threat is. It takes a fair amount of investigation to do that. But the reality is there's some indications that some LTTE elements would like to try and reestablish their capacities to some level.
Following the arrival of the two ships, a number of passengers have been investigated for alleged membership in the Tamil Tigers. Canada's immigration law has a provision that allows for the deportation of designated terrorists. The authorities are increasingly using it. One of the passengers accused of having links with the Tamil Tigers is Suran Kathigesu. He was working as a photographer and journalist in a tiger-controlled area. He is now facing deportation.
உண்மையிலே அது மனதை சரியாக பாதிக்கக்கூடிய படங்கள் தான் இந்த படங்கள். மக்களை முதலுதவி செய்திலிருந்து அந்த பகுதியில் நான் இருந்தேன். இந்த ஃபோட்டோ எடுத்த டைமில் வந்து 1000க்கும் மேற்பட்ட மக்கள் கொல்லப்பட்டிருக்கிறார்கள்.
Suran himself was wounded when the Sri Lankan government forces shelled hospitals.
Wow, that looks pretty serious.
Yeah. சத்திர சிகிச்சை செய்யும்போது எடுத்த படம். இது வந்து ஆஃப்டர் சர்ஜரி ஈவினிங் டைம்.
The hospital where Suran was treated was also attacked.
So that's where the shell came down? And that's where your bed was?
Yeah.
That's incredible, and you survived. Wounded patients were wounded again.
I am the witness. In front of me, more people killed by bomb and shell attack.
Yeah.
It is because of these photos that Suran says he needed to flee Sri Lanka. They could become evidence in a war crimes investigation against the Sri Lankan government.
So I know your case is still being decided by the courts, but are you absolutely certain that you want to stay in Canada?
இன ரீதியாக இப்போ ஸ்ரீலங்காவில் நாங்கள் இருந்தால் கூட இன ரீதியாக ஒதுக்கப்பட்டாங்க. இங்கே வந்து எங்களையும் தங்களோட ஒரு ஆக்களாக நினச்சி இப்போ நாங்கள் இங்கே உள்ள நாட்டு மக்களோட நாங்கள் சேர்ந்து வேலை செய்கிறோம். அது எனக்கு ஒரு சேஃப் மாதிரி இருக்கு.
We made an appointment with Suran's lawyer, Gabriel Chand, to find out more about Suran's legal case.
We're talking about somebody who's a journalist.
Yes.
Why would the government consider somebody who's a journalist a terrorist?
No one was allowed to write against the LTT in a powerful way, and so because there wasn't true independence in the eyes of the Canadian government, they considered him to be a tool of propaganda for the LTTE, and that was sufficient to find him inadmissible to Canada and essentially a member of a terrorist organization.
So how do you think can you convince the courts of the fact that Suran will be at risk if he gets returned?
The most important pieces of information we have is Mr. Asir Vatham, the first man from the MV Sunsea who was returned to Sri Lanka. Upon his arrival in Sri Lanka, he was detained by Sri Lankan authorities. He was viciously tortured. Eventually he was released, but recently he was killed.
Tamils suspect that Sri Lankan security forces were responsible for Asavithan's death, but this remains unconfirmed.
I've done a bit of reading about this case as well, and this is somebody who was accused of having been a weapons smuggler for the Tamil Tiger Network. That's why he was deported from Canada.
He was smuggling weapons for the Tamil people during a civil war. And so the civil war is over, he's in Canada. Is he really a danger to the Canadian society? I would argue that he isn't. Nonetheless, everyone should be, even if people have criminal records or have pasts that might be difficult, they still shouldn't be removed if they're going to face torture or death.
With the help of this case, Chand hopes to convince the Canadian authorities that clients like Surin must stay in Canada because it's simply too dangerous to deport him. The fate of people sent home from countries from which they have sought asylum is of increasing concern to the UN body responsible for refugee protection.
We have the 1951 Refugee Convention that was born out of the experience of the Second World War. One of the fundamental principles of the 51 Convention is that they cannot send people back who face persecution, who are in danger, who are at risk. It's very important that states abide by these obligations that they themselves have voluntarily assumed.
Patricia Kuno-Robinson fears that a harsh court sentence for people smuggling could keep her husband locked up for years. It's a long drive to the detention center, and past the Frederick Hobers takes Patricia and Bindevi so that the family can see each other. How often do you take Patricia to visit Kuno-Robinson in prison?
Right now, once a month. We started about in the new year. I don't know, I did it even before Christmas. I'm not sure.
Bindevi was born 6 months after her father was arrested. When she first got to know him, he scared her.
He asked her, come with me. She cried.
She doesn't know her father.
She doesn't know, she doesn't like to go with him. But now, she can speak very well. She always speak with her dad by phone, so she knows. When we arrived in Maple Ridge, that prison, she will say, "Mommy, Daddy house is scared." Say, "Mommy, Daddy is scared. Daddy is scared."
Robertson's is here for 4 years already, so that's a tough one.
Elements of the new immigration laws have been contested by lawyers all the way up to Supreme Court level. This drawn-out process has long delayed the start of Kuno-Robinson's trial.
If you have increasing border restrictions or closing of borders in some instances, you will also have a flourishing of a smuggling and trafficking market. What we really need in order to resolve the root causes of displacement and of conflict is political leadership. We require urgent political solutions to the many conflicts around the world today.
The Sunsea and Ocean Lady arrivals are the first wave of refugees affected by Canada's tougher immigration policies.
How was it? So you had a nice visit? Uh-huh. And Daddy was able to see the 3-year-old.
She sing a song.
Uh-huh.
Happy birthday to you, Daddy.
Oh, yeah, it was his birthday too, eh?
Yeah.
Sri Lanka insists that it does not mistreat returned refugees and that its aim is merely to prevent a resumption of Tamil armed resistance. However, there is widespread international concern about victimization of the Tamil minority in post-conflict Sri Lanka. But the Tamils are only one of a growing number of migrant groups seeking refuge in the West. What is happening in Canada is by no means unique. Around the world, international conventions for refugees are being sorely tested.